Coming from Muscle Beach Studios in Venice, California, this is the Better, Stronger, Faster podcast. My name is William Schufelt. I'm an actor, best known for playing the Red Power Ranger on Power Rangers Ninja Steel. And got Chris Bell here.
Yeah, I'm Chris Bell. I'm a filmmaker. You guys may know me from my documentaries, Bigger, Stronger, Faster, Trophy Kids, Prescription Thugs, or A Leaf of Faith. And today we have a very special guest, Dr. Shawn Baker. Dr. Shawn Baker is an orthopedic surgeon. You may have heard him on Joe Rogan's podcast. He eats an all-meat diet and has been taking the internet by storm. So we're going to dive into it and find out what Dr. Shawn Baker has to say about the carnivore diet.
Dylan! You son of a bitch.
From Venice Beach, California.
Better, stronger, faster.
All right, it's World Carnivore Month, and we are here with the carnivore, Dr. Shawn Baker. How you doing, Shawn?
I'm good. Yeah, I'm the first guy to ever eat meat, Chris. You know, it's kind of crazy. No, it's good, man. It's great to be here. It's good to see you guys. You know, I've had both you guys on my podcast, and so it's kind of neat to see the tables turn around. So,
absolutely, man. We have a lot of questions for you.
Well,
We're gonna pick your brain.
I got a lot of answers. They may be just BS, but they're answers, you know.
So if we can just do a little introduction, though.
Sure.
Who is Dr. Shawn Baker? What have you done? A little bit about your past and what you're currently doing.
Yeah, so I'm you know, whether I'm becoming fairly notorious, whether you like me or not.
You're the Antichrist.
I am. Yeah, I guess for something like that. No, I'm an advocate of a meat-based diet, I suppose. You know, carnivore diet, whatever you want to call it. I've been doing it for a couple of years now, and really been looking into some of the science as to why it happens and why it seems to work, and sort of bucking some of the traditional nutritional dogma that goes with it, trying to focus on results rather than theoretical, evidence. And a lot of it is just, we've got a lot of problems with our nutritional knowledge, and there's a lot of holes in that. My training is an orthopedic surgeon. I've been a lifelong athlete. You know, I've found that, for me, discovered later in life, in my 40s, that nutrition really can play a big role in both health and athletic performance. And so as I've gone from, more of a regular style, just eat whatever you want as long as you train hard, that got me to about 42 years of age until it didn't work anymore. And then I started playing with different diets, paleo diets. Well, I was almost a vegetarian diet at one point. I was a very high vegetable, high fiber, low meat, mostly, lean chicken breast type
I
stuff.
can't imagine that.
No, I did that. And it was kind of interesting because it did work. I mean,
Yeah.
I will say it, because it was a calorically restricted diet. It worked. I lost weight. I got leaner. In fact, when I lost weight initially, that's what I did. And because I was, at that time, I was competing in the Highland Games, and right now I'm about 245 pounds. That's tiny in the Highland Games world. I mean, most of these guys, a lot of these guys are 6'6", 6'7", 340 pounds, and so you got to be, I was pushing close to 300 pounds back then, and doing well, training hard. But then I was like, I'm 40-something years old. I don't want to be this heavy anymore, and so I slimmed down. So I did that with caloric reduction, which clearly works. However, it wasn't very sustainable, and it was not a diet that I felt like I could do long term, because I was always hungry. I was always thinking about food. I was always, just not feeling great, not feeling satisfied. And so and I'm a very disciplined person. And so then I went onto a Paleolithic type diet, and then I got into the low carb stuff, and then eventually ended up on a ketogenic diet for a couple of years, and then kind of started reading about this crazy carnivore stuff and thought I'd try it myself. And the results have been just very good. And so I kind of kept doing it, and now I'm kind of a bit of an advocate for it.
The first thing that I want to say, and I need to say, it comes straight from the heart, is thank you. Thanks for going on Joe Rogan's podcast, and thanks for being so open to us when me and my brother reached out to you. I was looking for something different. I have really bad arthritis. I had a double hip replacement surgery. I'm in pain all the time. Last February, I was in my brother's powerlifting meet called the Super Training Classic, and I deadlifted 407 pounds. And a couple weeks ago, I deadlifted 550 pounds with 2 fake hips. And so I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for literally changing my life just with your words, but also just being very open and kind to us and helping us through it and helping us figure it out. And for the people out there that don't know what a carnivore diet actually is, how would you define it?
Well, I mean, it's basically a meat-based diet. I think this is and first of all, Chris, you've made a lot of that is the work you've done yourself, and I think that's just for seeing you from now, from when I met you a little over a year ago, it's a remarkable change, and then we've seen the pictures of where you were 3 or 4 years ago or 5 years ago, and it's been incredible. So hats off to you.
We all need a catalyst for change.
Yeah, sometimes you gotta for some people it takes a pretty big negative situation to change your life, and a lot of people unfortunately that's what it takes. And it's not too early or too late for anyone to change. But as far as what is the carnivore diet, it depends on who you talk to. I'm pretty open about how I interpret that. And there's people that will say, "Well, oh my gosh, you had some seasoning on your meat. You're not a I don't buy into that stuff. I think more than anything, it's more of a results-based diet. It's something that you use animal products to hopefully enhance your health and to really be objective about what works and what doesn't for you. And it doesn't sort of revere any particular food above any other. We have this sort of natural sort of belief that fruits and vegetables are the ultimate in nutrition, and because our mothers told us that, and we've got some epidemiologic studies primarily that seem to support that, but again, that's not very good data. But in practical terms, it's basically a lot of meat, mostly red meat for many people, just because most people tend to gravitate toward that. But it can be poultry, it can be fish, it can be pork, it can be shellfish, any other kind of seafood. Some people find that including dairy is a positive. Some people have to modulate how much dairy they take in there. Then I tell people, as far as what else can you do with that, then I think it's up to your tolerance. And so some people find that seasonings and spices make it more palatable. Some people tolerate maybe some onions mixed in with their meat as a flavor. The real bottom line here is put meat in the center of the dish, and then everything else becomes flavor enhancement, maybe decoration, entertainment. But for some people, they just need to be very strict, particularly people that are battling autoimmune diseases or digestive problems. They find that being very, very strict. And for some people, it's just a bunch of red meat, water, and salt, like Michaela Peterson or something.
I'm starting to feel that way myself. The more you've obviously seen me. I do pretty well with some fruit, right. But the other vegetables, like I was having I'd have burgers and I'd have some onions with them, or I'd have some jalapeno peppers or something for some flavoring, and I just wasn't feeling as good. And recently, you and I and Smelly, we were in a text thread together talking about bone broth and stuff, and I really started loading up on the bone broth, and I feel like it does help my joints, but man, it sends me running to the bathroom all the time too. So there's issues with a lot of things. Even though my diet's pretty bare bones now, I still have some issues with some of that stuff.
Right. I mean, if I'm honest with myself, when I'm eating just red meat, I feel absolutely the best. I mean, that's me. But sometimes I'll have eggs, and sometimes I'll add other stuff, and I still feel pretty darn good. But I'm just I'm not 100%. And so at some point you have to say, I live in the real world. What am I willing to accept?
Yeah.
And, for me, when I'm competing and trying to hit high level athletic performance, I know the more often I feel really, really good, the better my performance is going to be. So I tend to generally be fairly strict, but like I said, I don't sort of talk down on somebody that doesn't do that all the time, because I think it's we all got to live in the real world.
For me, when I'm 80% beef and I feel like the rest is just eggs and fish, that's perfect. But we all have different goals. I mean, you're training for strength and pain management and body composition goals. So we've talked about what a carnivore diet is, a little bit about how to do it. Why would someone do this? We've already mentioned that it could be good for body composition, it could be good for strength, but why would a person want to do a carnivorous diet?
I don't really know. No, I mean, I think that,
well, if you don't know, we don't know.
No, I think I'm just joking. But I mean, I think for people that are, just not maybe happy with where they're at health-wise or performance-wise or body composition-wise, I mean, you can continue doing what you're doing. And, and this is, the one thing I say, and I know there's a lot of people that talk about moderation and balance, but I think if you want to make a big change in something, you've got to make a big change. Mm-hmm. And so for most people, going to an all-meat diet is a pretty big change from where they're at. And so I think you just have to say, if you're open-minded enough to say, okay, I'm going to do it for, 30 days for World Carnivore Month, or 60 or 90 days, which is probably more telling as to how well you'll do with that. But if you're saying, I'm just going to eat a bunch of meat for 90 days, I mean, what's the worst thing that's going to happen to you? You ate a bunch of steaks. I mean, you're not going to drop dead. You're not going to get scurvy. We know that's not happening. And so, so the downside is you may not feel any better. Okay, but you've ate a bunch of steaks. But for a large percentage of the population that do this, and we all see this. We get the feedback from literally thousands of people. I get dozens of people every day telling me, look, I'm no longer suicidal. I've quit being an alcoholic. My lifetime anxiety went away, or my Crohn's disease has gone away, or my rheumatoid arthritis has gone away, or my back pain, my chronic joint pain has gone away, or my psoriasis has gone away, or I've lost 50 or 100 pounds or whatever it is. I mean, these things are real world results that matter, and it doesn't matter what we think is the best thing for the population, because population health studies and population nutritional recommendations do not apply to one individual. And so you have to be willing to say, what's going to work for me, and what do I want to try, and do I have the freedom? And right now, you have the freedom to do that, and that's currently that's being challenged.
Sure.
So we may be in a situation where, a carnivore diet may not be, I wouldn't say it's illegal, but I would say that it may be very difficult to do due to potential taxes and things, and making it cost prohibitive, because a lot of people out there, it's hard for them to afford nutrition. And if you put what they're proposing, up to 160% tax on types of meat, it's a lot of money. So we may have people that don't even have the opportunity to do
Where is that tax coming from? Where is that idea coming from?
Well, so the idea is coming from some vegan activists, quite honestly. There's a guy named Marco Springman, who is a researcher out of Germany, I think. And so he wrote a paper that was published in a journal recently calling for that. And I think he was suggesting taxes on meat for, health benefits, and again, we can talk about the reasons beyond that. But the journal that he published it in was founded by the CEO of Impossible Foods.
Yeah.
So we've got this conflict of interest out there. The Eat Lancet group is going to be pushing out a multi-million-dollar campaign backed by processed food companies like Kellogg's, Berea, some of these fake meat companies, and this billionaire gal named Gunhild Stortalen out of Norway, who's a vegan, and they're pushing for the world to adopt this policy of this basically plant-based policy where we're going to limit our red meat consumption to no more than half an ounce a day. In Netherlands, they're talking about you get 2 meatballs a week or something like that.
Wow.
In Finland, they're already mandating that the army eats vegetarian meals twice a week. So if you're in the army in Finland,
let's go invade Finland then.
Well,
kick the crap out of them.
I don't know if we need to invade Finland, but I mean, this stuff is being talked about and coming, and it's probably going to happen unless enough people, and it doesn't have to be people on the carnivore diet, but people that say, hey, look, meat's a valuable part of the human nutrition. We don't need to be taxing this. We do not need to be restricting our access to it. And this is a thing. We talk about, nutritional epidemiology studies where they'll study, 50,000 people, and they'll say, well, people that ate, X amount of meat, a little more meat, had higher risk of colon cancer or diabetes or heart disease. Well, we have to realize that in the American diet, on average, since 1977, the U.S., we peaked in our red meat consumption, and it's dropped by about 40% since 1977. And in that time, have we gotten healthier? No, we haven't. We've had more diabetes, we've had more obesity, we've had more chronic disease, more autoimmune diseases, more cancers, and so on. The list goes on and on. So as we see red meat consumption fall, and again, this is not a direct correlation, but you have to say, how is it that the fact that we've eaten less red meat, we've got more sick, how do we blame meat for that? What's really going on is we're eating more processed food. We're eating particularly more things like vegetable oils, like these seed oils, like soybean oil. We're now soybean oil per calorie. We eat as much or more soybean oil than we do beef in the United States.
It's about 8% of the American diet.
About 8% of the American caloric intake is from soybean oil.
It's in every single salad dressing. Yeah. So before Mark Sisson, who's a big paleo keto guy who I really like, before he came along, there was not one single salad dressing that you could find, even in Whole Foods, that wasn't made with canola oil or soybean oil or sunflower oil, safflower oil, some crappy oil that causes major inflammation, shreds our arteries, and makes us sick.
Well, and the reason for that is, there were some studies that show that it potentially may reduce LDL. And again, this is one of the problems. We've been chasing the wrong stuff for 50 years, I think. And so we've got this horrible food supply right now, and they want to just push more of that on because it's cheap, and we want to just feed everybody cheap calories. And maybe we won't starve to death, and we can feed more people because we got more people to feed. We're going to be going 9 billion or maybe 10 billion people by 2050. So we're like, well, how do we feed all these people? We're just going to feed them cheap grains and cheap sugar and cheap. In fact, the most efficient way to get calories to a population is to feed them sugar. That is on a crop basis. That is the most efficient crop you can grow is just straight up sugar. So we can say what's more important, calories or actually nutrition. And so there is a big conflict, coming, and we see what happens to people that restrict their particularly protein. As they get older, they fall apart. And that's that's something that these people are advocating: less and less protein, more and more carbohydrate-based diet, and I think that's a bad future for us.
Well, let's get into that. So if you don't mind me mentioning, we know you just turned 52 and you backflip, you dunk, you do all of these different competitive strength sports. How does a carnivorous diet where there are no carbohydrates, you're eating primarily beef and, like you said, some eggs, fish, things like that. How does that impact your strength and your performance? And how do you feel at this age?
How it impacts it, objectively, I can say that, when I went from a ketogenic diet, and this may be a direct comparison just from ketogenic diet to a carnivorous diet, but I saw, when I could measure, things like my deadlift. Chris, I was sitting there at when I was about 45, I was sitting there 46. I said, I'd like to pull 405 for 20 reps, which, it's a decent amount.
Yeah.
And I would sit there and I would hit 15 reps, I'd hit 16 reps, and that was all I could do. And I kept trying. Every 3-4 months, I'm trying again. I did it for years and years and years. I never got past 16 reps. And within 2 months of doing carnivore, like I went in there one day and I pulled 18 reps. Like, okay, wow, I just got 2 more reps. The next week, I pulled it for 20. And I've been trying to do this for 6 or 7 years. And at that time, so I saw just without changing my training focus or style or technique, I just got stronger. Maybe it's just because of the more protein in the diet relative to keto, but I'd been on a not a ketogenic diet prior to that, so it's beyond just the ketogenic diet. In rowing, so I had set the American record in the 500-meter row when I turned 49, and I broke the 40-plus American record, even though I was almost 50, but I broke that record, and my time was like 1:16.5, which is among the best in the world, even for guys in their 20s. But then when I turned 50 and I've been on carnivore for a few months, about 3 or 4 months, I brought that all the way down to 114.6, which is about an 8% improvement over an already standing American record. That's a huge improvement when you're talking and that was a world record at the time.
At that level.
At that level, to improve 8% is significant, and it's not easy to do. This is not an easy. I know a lot of people don't know about the concept of running, but it is physically very difficult. So I've seen objectively significant improvements in my personal performance. I've seen, again, anecdotally, lots of people. Well, Chris, 407 to 550 deadlift. Yeah. That speaks some volumes there too. But so I think what we're seeing is, meat and protein and the carnitine and the creatine and the carnosine and the iron and the complete amino acids that we get in meat are very much muscle building. They're very much anabolic substances. We build muscle based on amino acids and then training and then recovery. And the carbohydrates don't really directly build muscle. They're a thing. It can restore glycogen. That's probably the benefit.
They're insulinogenic.
Well, there's no insulinogenic amino acids, but the insulin levels that required to build muscle, you don't need the levels that you get in carbohydrates. Stuart Phillips has shown this pretty conclusively in 2012 when they did studies on this. And so you just need X amount of insulin, which you can get from protein.
Yeah.
But carbohydrates do have a benefit with regard to things like glycogen. But long term, and this is a problem, we don't have any really these long-term studies on, and we've been studying ketogenic stuff a little bit for a while, and we see that in the short term, ketogenic athletes, they don't do as well in the glycolytic stuff, after 3 or 4 weeks because they're still transitioning. Now, when we look at those guys at 12 weeks, we're starting to see better and better results, comparable results. Now, if we add in the extra protein we're getting on a carnivorous diet versus a ketogenic diet, I think you'd see even in better improvement. I think that I don't think I have any issues with glycogen. I'm ready to go every day. I train hard. You guys have trained with me.
Sure.
I train hard.
Yeah, you killed us.
I do it all the time.
You're older than us, and you killed us.
But I do it. I recover. Just today, before I drove up here, I did a rowing workout where it was just 1 minute, but it was like, how fast can I row 1 minute, at just 30 strokes per minute. So I only pull 30 times. And I just tied the lifetime best I've ever done in my life. Just today, and I just come off of losing a bunch of weight. Remember, I was leaning out. I was leaning out. So I'm just now like, I'm going to get stronger again. And it's just like nothing. So I'm getting stronger and stronger 2 years into this. And so it's fun to see this stuff is much of what we consider normal aging is probably just metabolic disease. And so as that metabolic disease reverses, those things that you associate with aging tend to reverse, and so you get stronger. And I don't know how long it's going to last. One of the things that's interesting, we know about, go back to these industrial seed oils, these omega-6 that are easily oxidized. Stefan Guillenet did a study in 2015 looking at that and found that in the Western diet, I think in the U.S. diet, if we biopsy people's fat, we see that they are accumulating all these omega-6s, much like 50% more than they had 30 or 40 years ago. So this stuff that we're seeing in the diet accumulates in our tissues, our fat probably in our brain, probably around our nerves, probably intramuscularly, and that's causing damage. And that stuff stays around there for a year or two. It takes
You have to oxidize it eventually to get rid of it?
Well, no, you just have to, your body will eventually, take care of it, but it takes a long time. So if you're not eating it, so no, I haven't eaten that stuff in any significant quantities, unless somebody in a restaurant slips some of it and cooks their meat in there. But in general, I haven't eaten any of that stuff in 2 years now. So hopefully I'm getting rid of that stuff out of my body finally. And so that's why some of these people are where it takes a period of time to get rid of the stuff that accumulates in your tissues out of the body. So
there's a huge argument out there. I actually kind of got thrown under the bus a little bit on a podcast yesterday where Kyle Kingsbury was talking about grass-fed versus grain-fed, and he said, hey, Chris Bell, there's a lack of knowledge there. He just doesn't understand grass-fed versus factory-farmed animals. And I would attribute it not to a lack of knowledge, because I do understand that there is a difference. Have you seen that difference be important?
Yeah, so I think clearly there are some nutritional differences. And again, if we can talk about environment, we can talk about ethics, and we can talk about human nutrition. Now, if we stick to human nutrition, and I think that's an important topic to understand, there are clearly some differences between a grass-finished product and a grain-finished products. Now, those differences overall tend not to be that significant. When we look at absolute amounts, when we look at ratios, are a little improved. Certainly, a grass-finished product has a more favorable omega-3 to omega-6 ratio, a little more omega-3, not much. Neither of them have much omega-6. Does that clearly make a difference to people in general? So in general terms, I'd say for most people, it probably doesn't make a huge difference. There are certainly some people, and again, this is done based on observing actual human beings over time. Some people will find that they do, yes, indeed, they do better with a grass-finished product, but equally, there are many people that do just as well or better on a grain-finished product. And so it's hard to clearly come down and say, this is how we should eat. Now, that doesn't that's not an ethical argument. That's just what's happening with people. There was a study that Texas A&M put out, I think in 2012 or 2010, where they compared directly they were looking at hamburger patties, grass-finished versus grain-finished. Now, grain-finished has a higher monounsaturated fat. So if we believe monounsaturated fats are better, well, grain-finished has more monounsaturated fats, like the things that we think are healthy in olive oil, which most people don't know. But when they did that study, they looked at some markers of, biomarkers and some endpoints. I think they looked at blood pressure, they looked at HDL triglyceride levels, and things of that nature. And they found that the people that ate the grain-finished actually had a little bit better outcome. So, but again, those, it's arguable how important those particular metrics are when we talk about, lipoproteins. But in the same sense, with most people would say higher HDL is better, lower triglycerides are better, and therefore, maybe the grain-fed was better in that particular population. This is one study; it hasn't really been reproduced. So, but we don't have any great data out there. Now, certainly you can say, well, what is more favorable about a grass-finished product? Well, it's got higher conjugated linoleic acid. That's clear.
Yeah, CLA.
Yeah. CLA may be protective for heart disease. How much do you need? How much is the ideal amount? I don't think we know. Does grain-finish have some? Yeah, sure it has some.
Sure.
So is it, again, so I think the bottom line is, you have to, again, it has to be an individual thing.
Yeah.
Certainly it's easy to get, believe me, I could sit out there and say everybody needs to eat grass-finished. And because I'll be honest, I've got an affiliation with ButcherBox, who sells grass-finished products, and I would probably financially do better if I just told everybody you got to eat grass finished. But I want to be honest about that and say, look, what appears to be happening is for some people it's a benefit, for some people it's not, and it's expensive.
Well, I think here's the difference in my case with Kyle, right? And Kyle and I are friends. I love Kyle.
Right. Well, I did Kyle's podcast a while back too.
I think he's awesome. I just want to explain it. That's why I said I kind of got thrown under the bus a little bit because a lot of people are eating the grain, the grain finished stuff instead of the grass finished stuff. But here's the big difference for me. I have arthritis. I feel like shit every day. When I eat beef, I feel great. Kyle only lasted 17 days. I'm going into the second year now, so I don't think I could last more than 17 days on grass-finished beef because I don't like the way it tastes. I have a real problem with. I think it tastes like fish. And my nephew actually the other day got in trouble for not eating his dinner because he said, "Hey mom, did this cow learn how to swim?" And Andy, Mark's wife, said, "What are you talking about?" And he's like, "This tastes like fish." And because it was a grass-finished steak. And Mark, of course, just laughed because he thought the same thing. And to me, I would just say, defending myself, it's more important for me to hang on and stay on. I do eat some grass-fed stuff. I also do include some sashimi in my diet and some other things, that are really healthy. So that's just me defending myself. I think that I found that I'd rather stay on the diet long term than eat something I don't like or try to eat something I don't like. Maybe I'll get used to it or something like that. But I feel like being on it for the long term, to me, is way more important than what I'm eating. Now, the one concern I do have with the, and you might have some information on this, with the grain-fed stuff, where I would be in agreement with it, is glyphosate and things that they put, that they're the pesticides that go into the feed that our animals eat might have this glyphosate in it, and that might be really causing some problems. Do you know anything about that?
Well, I mean, Roundup is glyphosate.
Pesticide.
So it's kind of an interesting and agriculture in general is a very complex topic. And so if we look at glyphosate, and people say it's a carcinogen, and perhaps it certainly could be at certain levels. I don't doubt that. You got to compare it. What do they have before that? And so we look at these pesticides through the years and the toxicity levels. And if we look at what people were eating in the 1950s with pesticide levels, they were probably a lot worse than what we're eating now. And so you have to look at the big picture on that stuff. But yes, is glyphosate showing up in some of the foods that the cattle eat? Probably so. Is it showing up in the cattle themselves? Not sure. Maybe to some degree. Does that amount significantly affect us? It's the same argument with hormones. So you have to say, well, how much is in drinking water? How much of that glyphosate is ending up in our water supply? I mean, I don't know. And so you've got to say, well, what's the big picture stuff here? The same thing with well, I hate that cows have been implanted with hormones. Well, we talk about realistically, a cow that has a hormone implant, and it's usually testosterone or estrogen or progesterone. If we look at, say, for example, estrogen levels in an implant, so any cow normally makes estrogen. In fact, all three of us make estrogen. We make a certain, even though we're males, we make a certain amount of estrogen every single day.
Damn.
And so, I mean, you need to. It's part
of
course.
Hopefully, we make more testosterone.
You make a whole lot, William. Huh? You make a ton.
I make more than you do.
So anyway, so we've got this. So cows make a certain amount of estrogen. Doesn't matter if they get an implant or not, and so humans do too. But if you had to say how much estrogen, how many cows would I have to eat that have been implanted to expose me to the same amount of estrogen that I already naturally make every day? And so the answer to that is you would have to eat 27 cows every day, 27 entire cows. And a cow's that's like 600 pounds of beef times 27
to match your endogenous,
to match what you get endogenously. So the problem is people get so hung up on these minutia things. It's like, I don't want to eat a cow that had a nanogram of extra estrogen compared to one that didn't get implanted, but I'm going to eat an Oreo cookie. It's just like it's like come on, be realistic about it. We have to think big picture wise. And so yes, the food supply is not perfect. Can you make it perfect? If you're lucky enough and you can grow your own cattle and harvest that stuff, that's great. But that's not practical for most people. Like your point, you've got to be able to enjoy what you're eating to stick to it. And if you find that for whatever reason grass-fed beef just doesn't appeal to you, same thing with organ meats and some of the other stuff that people recommend. If it's not appealing to you, you're not going to do it, and therefore you're not going to stick to a diet. And so, I wouldn't look for, there's people that tell me I need to eat raw meat all the time, and I'm like, I just don't want to eat it. It just doesn't taste that good to me. I tried it. I mean, I'm happy that you want to do it, and
I've heard that raw meat argument as well.
Right, and so I'm just like, I'll eat beef tartare in a restaurant. I'll eat beef carpaccio or steak tartare.
I really like that
and
stuff.
it's good, but it's
we're not going to make it ourselves, right?
Well, it's not a grilled ribeye.
Well, I mean, it's not. I've done the go at home and eat the stuff. Big bowl of steak tartare, homemade, and it's just like it just wasn't that appealing to me. And so again, your point of what am I going to stick to is very pertinent.
Now, you had mentioned earlier this month you were getting leaner. What's the difference in the carnivore diet for you when you're getting leaner? What are you eating? And then if right now you're training for strength, what does that diet look like?
Yeah, so I mean, this is one of the, I think, sort of misconceptions about a carnivorous diet. There's a lot of people who say you can eat as much as you want and you'll never gain fat. And for some people that works pretty well. I mean, because it's very hard to eat tons and tons of steak for some people. There's some people that can put down 5-6 pounds of beef a day, no problem. And I can do that. There is a point, that the calories are going to matter. And I think I know when I was on your brother's podcast with Lane, all calories matter, and I agree with him to a point. But at the same point, you have to realize that a carnivore diet tends to be higher in protein than most people are getting. And protein, we know, even the people that are die-hard, calories in, calories out, people will definitely concede. If you eat more protein, you have a metabolic advantage. And some of the studies out there suggest 200-300 calories extra. So you can eat 200-300 extra calories, which is not a small amount when you're having protein. Now, there's studies out there that David Ludwig just put out at Harvard, it came out in, I think, November, showing that people and this was a $12 million study looking at a year, that people on a low-carb maintenance diet, after they lost weight, again, were able to eat an extra couple hundred calories, up to even 400 calories if they're insulin resistant. Yeah. So, I mean, you add that to the protein, maybe you've got a 500 calorie advantage, which is a significant amount. If we look at how much Americans have eaten, have increased their caloric intake over the last 50 years, it's something like 200-300 calories on average.
Because protein has a high thermic effect, and you burn through some of that. Yeah,
thermic effect is one of the reasons for that, and it's probably not the major benefit. But protein is very metabolically challenging to convert to sources of energy, and particularly to turn it into fat. It can be done, but it's metabolically very difficult to do. And so, guys like Dr. Jose Antonio, who has done some of these protein overfeeding studies where he would give people 200 grams, that's a lot, that's 800 calories, of extra protein a day. They gain no fat, no additional fat compared to any muscle. They just hang on to lean muscle mass. So you've got this potentially huge protein advantage with a carnivore diet. But to get back to your question, so when I'm at maintenance, about 4 pounds of meat a day, I sit there and I stay. Not only am I happy because I'm just eating as much as I want, and I maintain my body weight at about 240, 245, but I dropped down to about 230 and got, for my 52nd birthday, decent set of six pack.
Yeah, you looked awesome, man.
So I, what I did was I scaled back just a little bit. I just ate a little bit leaner beef. I rotated that with a little bit of fat. I'd have days where I was lean, 3 or 4 days, and I'd have a fat day.
It was interesting because I asked you when we had our carnivore meetup. I asked you afterwards. I said, well, if you just eat meat and that's all you eat, why don't you get shredded to the bone? I'm like, you look great. And I'm like, but I would think that with no carbohydrate, you would just get, naturally shredded. I believe that your answer was that a normal human being, back in the day, would be around 10-12%, right? They wouldn't be like those super shredded bodybuilders at 3% or whatever are doing sort of super physiological things to get there.
Right. Yeah. I mean, if we look at other primates, humans are the fattest primates, and the reason we are the fattest primates is because our brain requires a tremendous amount of energy, and we most likely evolve on a fat-based metabolism. And so, to support that, we have a little bit extra body fat that other primates don't necessarily have for the most part. And so, we need to maintain. So, if we look at indigenous tribes, there's none of them walking around at 3% body fat. They're usually, 10-15% body fat for the males.
It's funny because I never thought of it that way. I never put it in my head.
You always thought they were just shredded.
No, I never thought. I never thought that they were like 10%. You know, I just never.
Well, I mean, if you look at the physiques, they don't look like a physique competitor.
Yeah,
I mean, they
exactly.
look like,
and they're not lifting and
right. Well, they're not
things.
lifting and all that stuff. But I mean, but again, you talk about these guys. Obviously there's drug usage. There's diuretics. There's all these things that come into getting
Even just manipulating carbs with it, like
right.
pushing your muscles out against.
Right, and all those things come into play. And so, I mean, if I wanted to, be hungry, because I would be hungry at 6% body fat. If I wanted to walk around that way, I could, but my performance would tank.
Sure.
And so, I just think, if we're talking about why do we eat to be nourished, and we talk about health, then I think there's a point where, there's a sweet spot where most live, and it's not 30% body fat where so many Americans are sitting.
Yeah.
That's not the sweet spot. But I mean, guys like William, you're naturally a little leaner than probably myself or Chris are. Yeah. But we're all sitting there at, I would argue, if anybody looked at us, they'd say, none of you guys are fat, obese, or sick looking. We're all at a healthy level of body fat, and that's probably a normal human physiologic state, and it probably is going to provide us good health going forward long term.
Let's go backwards a little bit to the newcomers to this. I think that a big part of sending a really, a good message and getting people involved in this is getting them started. A lot of people want to know, I get this question on Instagram a lot, how do you start a carnivore diet? Should I just dive right in? Should I go keto first? Like, where do you suggest that people start?
Yeah, I mean, that is a good question, Chris. And in the book I've got, I talk about this a fair bit. But I think for a person that is, because a lot of people are already on a ketogenic diet, so that question already takes care of itself. For many, like, I'll talk about how I did it. I mean, I just, I was on a ketogenic diet, and then I started doing steak and eggs for 3 or 4 days in a row, and I would add carnivore meals, and I would just kind of gradually do it, and that seemed to work well. And then then I stretched it out a week, and then 2 weeks, and then a month, and then now it's been 2+ years. But I think for many people, I use the analogy of taking a Band-Aid off. When you got a cut, you got to pull a Band-Aid off. You can rip it off, and it hurts real bad for a second, or you can slowly peel it off, and it's it's a little bit of pain the whole time. So you can either just jump right in, and knowing that in many cases, particularly if you're coming from a high-carb diet, you may not feel particularly good. You'll have significant transition issues. The quote-unquote keto flu. Same thing happens, because this is still, in many cases, a ketogenic diet, and so you'll end up lethargic, maybe having headaches. Certainly your bowels will change initially. So that's something that people have to be aware of. And if they're willing to, if they're like, I'm just going to stick it out, it's going to depend on your mental state, I guess. Some people will find that by being very strict, it's kind of like, if you're asking an alcoholic or a heroin addict to give up alcohol or heroin, you're going to say, cold turkey, right? Mm-hmm. Right. But if some people have really big challenges with food addiction. I mean, that's a real thing, particularly sugary type stuff. It can be very, very difficult to get away from. It's everywhere. We're encouraged to eat it. It's like, can you imagine a world where heroin was legal and everybody told you, here, have some heroin. Here, good job.
Cheap.
Here, good job, kid. You did well on your homework. Have a hit of heroin. I mean, that is basically what we have the situation with sugar.
Yeah.
But we've just kind of accepted it because it tastes good and it makes us happy and we like it. And it's a low dose. It can be a very high dose thing now, but so it can be very difficult to quit. And so a lot of people need to be to not sort of sabotage themselves. Just need to be strict. There's other people. Again, it depends on your level of discipline. If you can handle that and say I'm going to transition away for that. Then that also works well. Some people will find that from a GI standpoint, because some people will notice, the misconception about the carnivore diet is you get all constipated. Well, that generally is not what happens. You may not go to the bathroom as much, because you're just not wasting anything. Here's the funny thing. About 40% of the food that we produce in this country ends up in a landfill. It all just goes to waste. We waste so much food here, and the majority of that is fruits, vegetables, and baked goods. It just all goes in the trash, right? Mm-hmm. So we've got this, we're talking about food efficiency and wasting food. And
there's actually a documentary called Food Waste about that.
Yeah.
It's a really good documentary.
I haven't seen it.
Well, I'm just saying it for anybody out there that's listening. There is a documentary on that, and you're right. We waste a lot of food.
We waste a ton of food. And then we think about it, when we're eating a high-fiber, quote-unquote, plant-based diet, we go to the bathroom a lot. Yeah. And the reason we do that is because much of that nutrition just can't be absorbed. The fiber binds much of that up. So a lot of those calories or nutrients that you would otherwise be absorbing, what you do on an all-meat diet, just goes in the toilet. So you're wasting even more food in the form of crap. So, but when you're on an all-meat diet, as you guys probably find out, you just don't go to the bathroom as frequently. You don't have as, as large bowel movements to kind of get a little gross about this stuff. But so that is something that people have to get used to. They're just like, because they'll start the diet and they're like, I haven't gone to the bathroom in 3 or 4 days. And you're like, okay, well, you're just not wasting anything.
I get both sides of it. So I get that, and then I get people that are, it's funny because the very first time, well, actually the second time I was on Joe Rogan, I talked about, because I told you I did this way back in 1995.
Ron Fedko, right?
Yeah,
Fedko,
Ron
right?
Fedko, yeah.
Right.
Like, not like I invented it either. Like somebody told me, and I said, well, I'm going to try that. And I did it for a couple months. I lost a lot of weight. And I remember talking to Joe Rogan about it and going back and looking at that. And his first question is like, what were your shits like, And it was funny because I get that so much on Instagram, and I get this fact of like, hey, I'm on a carnivore diet and I can't stop running to the bathroom. So either way, if people are having these issues, what are they? How do we solve them?
Sure. Yeah.
Does it just take time?
Yeah, so I mean, again, most people, really constipation is not that common. It does happen in a small percentage of people, but the more common thing that you do see is loose bowel movements. And, and that's probably, I'd estimate it's about 30% of people run into that.
Yeah, Mark's, podcast producer, Andrew Zaragoza, we were texting yesterday. He's been having this problem a lot.
Sure.
I'd like to see what do you recommend?
Yeah, so let's talk about the colon. That's a fun topic, right? So the colon, one of the functions of the colon obviously is to store and get rid of waste, but one of the things it does is reabsorb fluid and reabsorb minerals from what comes out of the small intestine. So where our digestive tract is, mouth, esophagus, stomach, small intestine, large intestine, and there's different parts in there. But so when you're a baby, you're on a liquid diet, right? Hopefully you're on a breast milk diet for most of us, and you've got all liquid that goes through, and then what happens is your colon gets that liquid, and it absorbs some of that stuff, and then the baby, after a time, they start having solid bowel or semi-solid bowel movements. So the colon is very efficient at reabsorbing fluids in that stage. But then what happens is you go on a high fiber diet, and you spend 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years eating a bunch of fiber, and so the colon says, all that fluid is bound up in fiber, so I don't need to absorb fluid anymore. So it kind of loses some of that capacity. And so what happens is when you go back on an all-meat diet, everything that hits your colon, again, is liquid. And we know that from patients that have had their colons removed. It's called a patient with ileostomy pouches. So if you feed them a meat, the only thing that comes out is just a bunch of liquid. So again, you're on an all-liquid diet, basically, as far as your colon's concerned. And if it hasn't been used to absorbing fluid, then it's just not going to do it very well for a while. And it sometimes takes, a couple of weeks, even a couple of months for some people to build up that capacity. Yeah. Now, some people will find, in addition to that, certain foods can make that happen even more. So a lot of fat. Some people, if there's too much fat in their diet, that happens. Some people notice that a lot of eggs in the diet will cause that. Some people notice a lot like pork. For whatever reason, will tend to do that. Some people with just spices, and that's the thing. We'll talk about, Joe Rogan talking about his kale shakes. He's talking about it goes right through me, right? Yeah. And I'm like, you know what? It's because your body doesn't want that crap in you. It's trying to get rid of it, Yeah. So some people will find if maybe certain spices, they're putting a lot of hot sauce on their stuff, and then all of a sudden your body, the mucosal membranes in the intestines say, this doesn't feel good. It's irritating. I want to get rid of it. And so the fastest way it gets it out of there is just, diarrhea, basically. So those are things that tend to happen. Some people, I will tell that, the first thing I tell is most of you just wait out and it goes away. And then modify eggs, fat, pork, and sometimes even too lean can be a problematic issue. But then some other group, they just need to, taper in the fiber, out the fiber rather. So they need to maybe start with some fiber in the diet and then slowly bring that out. And I think that helps. And some people, just a small level of background, like Dr. Drew, I was on his show a couple of days ago, and he's been a carnivore now for 10 months, and he says, he takes a little bit of fiber, just a fiber supplement.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Drew's an interesting one. I was so scared to bring it up on his podcast, and so I went on his podcast, and then once I brought it up, he looked into you, because I started talking about you. I talk about you to everybody, and then I think they called you to be on it, and I was really scared to tell him, well, I do this carnivore diet. And he was like, that's very interesting. And now he's all about it. He loves it. I talked to him about it. And it's really interesting to see other people that are doctors get behind it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm aware of dozens, if not, maybe hundreds of doctors right now that are pro carnivore. They're seeing, mostly personal benefits, but they're starting to apply this to their patients with the same thing. And some of them are saying, well, we're gonna reserve it for this subset of patients, and that's great too. I think we just need to be open-minded about this stuff and say, look, we need to be results-centric rather than dogma-centric. And so it's like, what is actually working for the person in front of me today? What is something they can stick to and enjoy and get some results? And if it happens to be a diet where you eat a bunch of steaks, I mean, that sounds like torture, right?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on the carnivore diet and longevity? Because a lot of people talk about mTOR stimulation, IGF-1, these growth factors that can indiscriminately grow cells in the body, cancerous or not. Are you concerned at all about that? And what are your thoughts just in terms of longevity with the carnivore diet?
Yeah, so one of the, mTOR is something that we still are very early in our true knowledge on that. And I had Ben Bickman on my podcast the other day, and we had this discussion.
He's fascinating. He's awesome.
So that'll come out soon. But we talk about that, and in humans, we see what happens when we restrict protein. We know what happens. We see, absolutely people become frail, incapacitated as they get older. That just clearly happened. We can point to, again, if I challenge people to do this all the time. I say, go look up the Hong Kong life expectancy, right? And when you look it up, it says people in Hong Kong live longer than anywhere else in the world. There's 7 million people who live in Hong Kong. And then I say, well, look up Hong Kong meat consumption. And they look that up and they say, guess what? The people in Hong Kong eat more meat than anyone else in the entire world, and they live the longest. And so you can say, well, if protein is causing, mTOR stimulation, and it's going to cause some sort of cancer or longevity problem, it's not showing up in populations that are actually doing this. The one thing about mTOR is we need mTOR. It's not like it's this is a problem people have. They find out it's like the same thing with insulin. People say, well, if you have hyperinsulinemia and your insulin is very high, that's a bad problem. And clearly it is. But then people are like, well, I need to keep my insulin. I need no insulin. No, you need some.
No, we need it.
The same thing with mTOR. mTOR helps us to stimulate and build muscle. We need muscle to, be functional, to live long.
Muscle. A big marker of longevity is your strength, right? Your
quad strength. Yeah, quad strength, grip strength. There's been a number of studies out there that support that being stronger, not necessarily having big muscles, but being stronger, correlates to longevity, and so and functionality and stuff like that. And so I don't see, I know guys like Walter Longo have talked about that with their diets, but that data really comes from not human studies. It comes from single-cell organisms, worms, flies, mice, stuff like that. It's really it can't be extrapolated out to data. We had this talk with Stu Phillips, who's one of the leading protein researchers in the world, and we talked about that. And some of the data that they've used based on epidemiology was really just not done well. So I don't think, realistically, that mTOR is the boogeyman that we think it is.
I'm sure there's a lot of people at home screaming like that, Hong Kong, there's these blue zones out there, right? And these blue zones are where the people live the longest. And in the blue zones, the people are usually mainly vegan or plant-based.
No, that's actually not accurate, but there's a belief that is the case.
So what is the argument, the opposite, the flip side of, so they say that these blue zones, these people live the longest, right? What is your take on that? That's actually not true?
Well, certainly, there are a lot of reasons why people live long. Diet is probably not the number one reason why people live long or short. The number one reason, if you want to live a long time, live in a rich country. Live in a place where you have access to health care. Live in a place where you have clean sanitation and fresh drinking water, and you have enough nutritional adequacy. If you go, we can look at most of Africa. Most of sub-Saharan Africa, where they're on a plant-based diet because they can't afford meat, and their life expectancy is like 46, 48. And why? And we can look at India. India has the highest number of vegetarians in the world. 38% of their population is India. Same with Bangladesh. Same with Pakistan. Life expectancy is about 15 years less than it is in western part of the world. So I mean, these blue zone studies, there's some quite like the Okinawan stuff. Some, they said they studied the Okinawan diet and they ate a largely plant-based diet. But they remember some of the data they got on those folks was based after World War II, where they went in there and we decimated the population, killed all their animals, and they're kind of stuck with that. But if you look at traditional Okinawan cooking, it's tons of pork. And the other thing is they don't eat vegetable oils. They cooked everything in lard.
Yeah.
They need a lot of sugar. And
So the biggest offenders are gone right there.
Well, I mean, potentially, yeah. I mean, so
Yeah.
you could say, well, what is the dietary? Is it the fact they eat plants, or they don't eat much meat, or is it the fact that they're not eating a bunch of vegetable oils and sugar? Is it the fact that they're genetically might have an advantage? Is it the climate? Is it the fact that they regularly exercise? They have a very culturally important reverence for their elders, and they participate and they stay active into their 70s and 80s and 90s. By the way, when they looked at those studies, the only people of the Okinawans that lived over 100, none of them were vegetarian. They were all people that included meat in their diet. And so, again, we have to make sense. Same thing with the Loma Linda data. The Seventh-day Adventists, a lot of people, these vegetarian folks that like to bring them up. Yes, the Seventh-day Adventists live longer than many other people. They don't drink, they don't smoke, they don't drink coffee, they exercise regularly. Sure, they promote a vegetarian diet, but and they're wealthier and they have a lot more money. But guess what? When you look at their data, the group that lived the very longest among that group were people that included animals in their diet, in this case, in the form of seafood. So
it's very misleading in a way.
It's very misleading. Again, diet is not the number one reason. People will criticize like the Inuit. So the Inuit, they'll say, well, their life expectancy right now is about 68, which is about the same as the folks in India are living. Now, the problem with the Inuit is they're poor. They live a subsistence. They don't have very good access to care. They smoke at some of the highest rates in the world. About 70% of their population smokes cigarettes. They start at about age 8 is when the kids start smoking. They smoke when they're pregnant.
70%.
70%. They have the highest smoking rates in the world, if I'm not mistaken. So we're talking about, well, they only live to 68. Well, they smoke like damn chimneys.
Yeah.
So you can't blame that on their diet either. And so when we looked at the Inuit back in the 1850s, when they first started to do population surveys, they were living as long as anybody else. So, and back then, the life expectancy was only about 45. So everybody lived about 45 back then.
Let's talk about babies, because I interviewed Rob Wolf, and one of the most interesting things that he brought up to me was the fact that so many people are damaged from getting fed like wheat products and stuff, like, when they're just little babies. And I see all the time parents walking around with these little Ziploc bags full of those goldfish, and the little... the little snacks that they give their kids, and these are, little babies. And then I read on I think it might have been one of your posts that like they're saying like that meat is something that, like one of the baby's first foods. So how does that stuff infect our intestines and our insides? Like when we're just sort of forming, when we're a baby, we go from breast milk. Should meat be the first thing that they eat, or is it like, how does that work?
Yeah, I mean, my opinion is, babies one of their first foods should certainly be meat. I mean, I think that's an important part of their diet. I mean, humans have done that probably forever. We've got populations, we still have populations that live that way, where the kids grow up on a meat-based diet, and they don't have any deficiencies. Meat is very complete for that. One of the sad things we see, and we tend to blame it on genetics, but what's happening is in utero. So these these human fetuses are being exposed to extremely high levels of glucose via the mother, and they're developing insulin resistance in utero, and so they come out born out, basically craving extra glucose. And then what we do is many of them are formula fed, and if you look at the ingredients on formula, it's ridiculous. It's like soybean oil and corn oil, corn syrup. I mean, this is what a lot of these infant formulas have, and so the baby is now pumped full of corn syrup from day one, and then the first foods tend to be these grain-based and often sugary-based, sweet, syrupy fruits and stuff like that, and the kids just start, and so they start with an obese mom who's insulin resistant, and then they just start. I mean, they start from day one, and so by the time they're 10 years old, they're obese, and then it gets passed on to the next generation. It's not a genetic thing; it's just a dietary thing, and it just kind of gets worse and worse. But to your point about gut health, I don't know that, there's some data out there, guys like Alessio Faisano I think he's out of Boston Children's, is looking at, in pediatric patients, a relationship with food and leaky gut syndrome they're seeing in pediatric patients and autoimmune diseases. And so we're seeing so many kids with asthma now. Asthma is actually an autoimmune disease. Most people, I didn't realize that until I started looking into that. So we see all these asthmatic kids. We see all these kids with eczema. And it's probably dietary related. It probably may be for many of these kids seexposure to whether it's gluten, whether it's certain wheat products, whether it's our gliadins, whether it's the seed oils that we're seeing. Those tend to cause, at least based on some of the work coming out of Europe, a leaky gut situation. And so we're starting out young that way. And so many people are compromised. They don't grow as well. They have behavioral issues. And we look at how much mental health disease has since 1945 has gone up like 20.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that because that's something our brother Mad Dog struggled with a lot, and I think part of the reason why he's not around anymore. Mental health is a lot of it is associated with what we eat, right?
Sure. Yeah, I think we're finding out more and more that many of these mental health disorders, whether it's like some of things like schizophrenia, but even depression, anxiety, they're related to things like hyperinsulinemia. We see that, and I think we're seeing also there are some people that feel that some of the mental health disorders are also autoimmune in nature, and again that ties back to this gut issue, which is directly impacted by the foods we eat. And so, all of us, because you and I grew up roughly the same time. We're eating our Captain Crunch and our Count Chocula and loving it. And, the parents, my kids are happy. And they're trying to do the best they can.
Sure.
But really, you're not doing your kids any favor by feeding them all these sugary processed crap, even though it tastes good. I mean, that stuff tastes good. I mean, it really does. And the food companies know that. And the problem is, as long as you are addicted to sugar, and so many of us are, you're never going to quit it. You're never going to stop it.
And you have kids, right?
I've got 4 and maybe one more coming.
So. Oh, wow.
Maybe.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Wow.
So keep eating that meat, man. He's 52, cranking them out. Hey, so what do you do with your kids as far as food goes?
So when I feed them, it's a lot of meat. But I don't force them to be carnivore. And a lot of days that's all they want to eat. They're like, I like meat. They like doing it. But unfortunately, particularly my daughters, I've got a 10-year-old and 8-year-old daughter. Whenever I cook up a nice ribeye steak, they've identified the rib cap, which is a really flavorful part of the top.
What's up?
And they're like, they want that. They want to steal it from me. So what I'll do is I will load them up on what I consider the healthiest food on the planet, which is meat or animal products, meat, steak, eggs. Maybe some yogurt or dairy or something like that. I usually get a Greek yogurt and, make it like I want it. I don't put the crap that the companies put in there.
Yeah.
And they load up on that. And then beyond that, a lot of times that's it. They're not hungry. And the nice thing about, my kids is, you load them up and they're not snacking every half hour. I'm hungry. And they always want to constantly eat like so many kids do. But if they want to eat some fruit, I give them fruit. If they want to eat vegetables, which they rarely do, my daughter sometimes they'll eat a carrot or something like that. But I don't force that on them. It's basically a meat-based diet, maybe some fruit here and there, a little bit of starches, maybe some rice or something like that, and some bread every once in a while. I try to really limit the processed stuff. I try to really stay away from the seed oils because I think that is insidious and absolute garbage. Mm-hmm. I try to limit their sugar. Like if they go, sometimes they'll want like. They want like a little piece of dark chocolate or something like that. We'll go to the store and they're like, I want one little treat, and I'll say, well, what look at the ingredients, figure out something that has X amount of grams of sugar or less, and that's what you can have. And that's how I try to approach it. And my kids are all healthy and active, and they're doing
It actually
great.
sounds like that's a good program almost for anybody like that.
Sure.
Even if they're not going to do a carnivore diet, put the meat up front, have these couple little things when you want them, right?
Yeah. No, I think like I said, I think that as much as many people benefit from a strict carnivorous diet, I think the whole point is, make meat, because we're being directed right now to make meat a condiment. Just have a big old plate of plants and then put a sliver of meat on there, just so you don't die, right? but I mean, I think really, meat is nutrition. Meat is the optimal, ultimate human nutrition, and the more of it you're fortunate to have. We're very fortunate these days. For much of human history. You could not get that. It's only now through the fact that we have a lot of wealth that we can afford to all eat meat. At least in the United States, at least for now. Back in the day, if you had a cow, you weren't eating a thing because it plowed your field. It was your beast of burden. And so when it got old, at 25 years old, when it was ready to die, then you would eat it. But prior to that, meat was a luxury for many people.
What are your thoughts on the whole hormetic benefits of plants argument? So basically that they're, through their anti-nutrients and effects like that, they cause our bodies to increase our own basically defense systems.
Sure.
Do you believe that, or
Yeah,
do you have a different take?
do I believe it? Yeah, I mean, certainly, you can make that argument with alcohol. If we look at cytochrome P450 and alcohol dehydrogenase in the liver, if you drink alcohol, those numbers will go up. I mean, you'll make more of those enzymes to detoxify that. It'll be to exposure. Is that ultimately beneficial to us?
Net benefit?
I don't know. I don't know that it is. I mean, certainly the answer is I could drink a little gasoline every day and I would probably develop a tolerance to gasoline. Does that mean I need to drink gasoline every day? Or do I need to breathe in smog here in LA every day to say, well, it's hormetic because I'm taking this smog in? So I think it's theoretical. It's a theory. The hormesis theory is just a theory.
Sure. And for people that don't know what hormesis is,
it just means it's a stressor that will, theoretically it's a positive benefit. Exercise. People say, well, exercise is stress.
a low-grade stress that can produce a positive effect.
Yeah, and again, it does produce effect. There's no doubt that those enzyme levels will go up. I don't think that's in contention. The question is that truly beneficial? If you could say, if I could go through life, drinking a little poison every day, would that benefit me? Or if I didn't have to have the poison exposure, and I think that's the way to look at that. But, certainly, it could be the case. And, I think you just have to test it. But I mean, I can tell you that what we're seeing on people that, people that eliminate a lot of these vegetables from their diet, they get healthier.
Yeah.
And
that's one thing I wanted to
Yeah.
ask you because being a carnivore, and doing this diet for over a year, when I try to explain it to people, one of the it makes me feel kind of like a weirdo because they're like, well, like vegetables aren't bad though, and I'm kind of like, well, they're not bad, but they're, I don't, and I kind of just like, it's almost because you just sound crazy trying to explain to people why they might not want to have vegetables in their diet. How do you normally explain it to people without sounding too crazy?
Well, I mean, it probably still sounds crazy, but I mean, if we look at, we can talk about an evolutionary, argument. And again, I don't have a time machine. I didn't fly back there, but I will tell you that, when we look at how humans got their energy, back then we didn't have dietitians telling us to eat 5 fruits and vegetables a day. It didn't exist. We didn't know what phytonutrients were. We didn't know what phytochemicals were. We didn't know what antioxidants. And nobody knew about that stuff. And so when we look at how do I get energy to feed myself, right? You're in a world where there's all these big giant fat animals floating around. And so we did that. We know that. It's clear that we did that. There are probably some fruits around that we ate seasonally, okay? Because those things didn't kill us and they didn't taste bad. They probably tasted okay. They didn't have near the sugar content that they have now. There were probably some starchy roots that were available, although mind you, most of those were very fibrous. They were very woody and pulpy, and they weren't very nutritious. So you probably wouldn't spend a lot of time, investing much of your energy there. But then you have, vegetables, leaves, which have no calories. I mean, really, and they don't taste. They're very bitter. And so to think that a primitive human would say, I'm going to get all my nutrition, I'm just going to eat a bunch of these leaves because they taste very bitter, they don't taste very good, and there's no nutrition from them. So I don't think that would have been a very wise strategy, and it's pretty clear we probably didn't do that. Now, vegetables, many of the vegetables, like for instance broccoli maybe came into existence about 2,000 years ago in Italy. It didn't make its way to Western Europe until about the 1800s. Didn't make it to the United States until about 1920.
Well, a lot of people don't know these things are
man-made. They're man-made foods, and so most of these things we talk about, this broccoli is so great. Well, it didn't even exist for most of mankind's existence. So to say it's required is kind of silly. But beyond that, what I say is, they've got. We talk about phytonutrients. We have phytochemicals. There are chemicals that these plants make. Some of them are maybe potentially benefit. Maybe they're hormetic stressors, but certainly some of them can be problematic. Oxalates are a perfect example. Oxalates they show up quite a bit in some of the leafy green vegetables, particularly like spinach and even things like almonds. Oxalates can cause kidney stones. In fact, the number one cause of kidney stones are oxalates, and so you don't get that from meat.
Yeah, we see that a lot in keto diets, and people think it's from meat.
Right, they think it's from the ketosis, but they're pounding down all the almond flour and all the spinach and the big salads and stuff like that. And so So there are compounds in plants that some people just don't tolerate as well. And so I think you have to just be, very circumspect and say, maybe these plants do okay for me, maybe they don't. And I don't necessarily say, vegetables are bad for everybody, but I say they might be bad for you, and you need to find that out. And then we have to look at it in comparison. Is eating a bowl of spinach for me better than eating a plate of donuts? Probably.
Yeah.
Probably it is.
And there's some things that we can do. We can cook them to get the
Right,
oxalates
yeah.
out. And different things.
I think the oxalates don't do. I mean, cooking doesn't really help that much with oxalates, but there's other things. Like there are other
It'll
chemicals.
kill some of the
lectins
nutrients.
and
Yeah, some of these things where we soak and sprout and ferment can help some of those things. And so, I look at it as this: is anything that displaces donuts from the diet, and donuts are refined grains, sugar, and seed oils. Anything that displaces that from the diet is probably a good choice, and vegetables and fruits will probably do that. But anything that displaces meat out of the diet is probably a lesser choice. And so you look at this and you've got bad, neutral, and good. And I consider fruits and vegetables more or less neutral. And I know that's controversial, but based on what I'm seeing with people that eliminate them getting better is a conclusion that you can certainly draw.
I think we hear a lot that fruits are actually kind of more okay because they're what the plant bears and wants to give out to the animal world, so the animals will take it and spread the seeds around. Is that true?
Yeah, I mean, plants aren't our friends. I mean, they're not there to die for us. They don't want us to eat their leaves and their stems, and they're not like, oh yeah, eat my leaves so I can die and stop doing photosynthesis. Yeah. They will make fruit, and they will entice animals. And mind you, many of the there's a lot of poison berries out there. I mean, there's a lot of fruits that's species specific. And so there's a lot of things. There's a lot of animals that will eat the wrong fruit and it'll make them sick and die. And humans are no exception to that. So not all fruit is created equal. There again, same things. We've cultivated a lot of those things. We've hybridized them. We've made them very sugary to suit our taste. But at the same time, most of those, the reason I want you to do is so you eat it and then you poop out the seeds, right? That's so you can spread out their, they're not doing it to do a favor for us. They're doing it for their own benefit, for their interest. And some of those seeds in particular are very chemically rich and can kill you. Like, if you eat apple seeds, if you eat a handful of apple seeds, not that anyone would do it, cyanide would kill you. Cyanide would kill you from that. And so these fruits are still protected with some chemicals. We tend to hybridize most of those and bred that stuff out and concentrate on the sugar part of it, which is what we like. So fruit is, probably for many people a little more tolerated than some of the other, bitter leaves. There are people that have issues with glucose and pre-diabetics and diabetics, people that are particularly insulin resistant, that fruit may be an issue for. There's some concern that high levels of fructose. Again, the human diet probably contains some amount of fruit in it going back, probably not high levels, and I think when you talk about high levels of fructose, if we talk about something called glycation or advanced glycation end products, which are part of a consequence of sugars binding to protein and causing those proteins not to function correctly. Fructose is much more potent at doing that and causing damage than glucose is, and that's one of the reasons why we talk about these populations like the Asians that eat a lot of rice. Rice is primarily glucose. Basically there's no fructose in rice. It's all glucose. It's disaccharides and stuff like that. So, but now when you add to their diet high fructose corn syrup or colas or sucrose, which is fructose and glucose together, that's probably causing some of these problems where we're seeing more and more diabetes occurring in those places.
Okay, so just to zoom out from carnivore here for a second, I'm interested, are you stronger than you've ever been right now? Or is your strength still progressing?
I would say from a absolute numbers, no, because when I weighed 300 pounds, I was stronger. I'm 60 pounds lighter. Okay. But I mean, from a weight strength ratio,
relative strength.
I am. I mean, I'm hitting numbers at 52 that I couldn't hit, at this same weight, at 45, or 46 whenever I first dropped this weight. So I am, not that far off of my lifetime best in a number of things, and so. So yeah, I mean, generally, again, as a power lifter, Chris,
Sure.
there's a reason the super heavyweights lift a lot of weight, and it's just mass moves
Yeah, a lot of
mass.
it's,
and,
leverage.
A lot of it's
Leverages.
leverage and stuff like that. And so, I would say I am arguably as strong as I've ever been, certainly pound for pound, than before. And so and I'm getting stronger.
What is it about red meat that seems to do that? I mean, I know Stan Efferding always, even the bikini girls that he trains, he puts them on red meat, and they all get stronger. It seems. Yeah. What is it about it?
Well, I think it's a combination of things. I think and one thing is overlooked. I think the fats in red meat probably contribute to that, both the saturated and monounsaturated fat. Remember, beef is mostly, and people don't know this, is mostly monounsaturated fat. And then there's much saturated fat in there, but it's mostly monounsaturated fats. And there are some studies coming out looking at how fat impacts muscle growth. So we don't really know for sure, but potentially that's a part of it. Certainly the amino acid profile. We've got this complete protein. It's ideal. You and I, if I were to, and I've cut a lot of people open as a surgeon.
Yeah.
When you cut people open, they're made out of red meat. That's what we're made out of. That's what our muscles are. When you're in there doing back surgery on somebody, you look at it, it looks like a damn fillet. You're sitting there going, remember I was sitting in surgery going, and 6-hour, 8-hour surgery, getting hungry, and you're looking at that big back strap there going,
Nice marbling on that.
Yeah, it's got nice marbling there. You don't want to go cannibal just yet. But beyond that, there are, if we look at some of these products that, from a supplement standpoint that have actually worked, creatine probably being one of the most effective supplements that have been out there. Meat's got a lot of creatine in it. Red meat does. And some of it's inactivated by cooking. But when you're eating 3, 4, 5 pounds, like bodybuilders like Serge Nubret, I put that post up there. That guy eats 7 pounds of horse meat a day.
Do you remember when creatine came out, they would say, you'd have to eat 2.2 pounds of red meat in order to get this?
Right.
And you'd say, wow, nobody would ever eat that.
Right.
That's what I used to think.
And I'm eating twice of that a day.
Yeah.
So but that's one of the things, there's evidence that carnitine, is beneficial. Carnosine probably has a beneficial role. We know that the iron is effective, the zinc content. I think just the combination of those things, the ease of digestibility, the fact that it's so well absorbed, the protein, arguably the only better protein source is probably whey protein. Whey protein probably has a little bit better digestibility source. But when we talk about things like leucine, which is essential for muscle building, meat's got that in spades as well. And so I think that probably more than anything has to do with that. And there's probably things we don't know that are in
Is there anything, I know this is actually one of the first things I asked you when we met, but I think the audience needs to hear this. Is there anything in red meat that we are lacking that we need to get from somewhere else?
This is an interesting question because, if we look on paper, we would say that red meat is probably a poor source of vitamin C. We would say that maybe it's not got as much vitamin A as we might need when we're talking about steaks compared to things like liver, which has plenty of vitamin A. It probably doesn't have quite as much vitamin E. It may lack a little bit in manganese. Those things, you can make the argument based on the RDA that they would be low or difficult to obtain a 100% RDA on. That's clear. The problem with that is when we look at how the RDA was established, the recommended daily allowances, they were established looking at people eating a 60-70% grain-based diet. We know that those aspects of the diet contain a lot of anti-nutrients. Fiber will bind up many of the minerals. Oxalates will bind up minerals. Phytates will bind up minerals. There's a lot of competition. So when we're not, and we also know that a lot of those things like for instance, magnesium. Is a cofactor for for carbohydrate metabolism. And so when you're not metabolizing carbohydrates, guess what? You probably need less magnesium. So many people are deficient in magnesium these days. It may be because we're eating so many damn carbohydrates. Vitamin C, again, one of the biggest thing is you're surely going to get scurvy. That's probably the biggest thing where you're going to be low on. And yet no one, to my knowledge, on a carnivore diet has gotten scurvy. The only exception would be someone who tried to live off of things like beef jerky. And that's happening. This is why these British...
That's what happened with the pirates and stuff, right?
Yeah, the British sailors, the so-called limeys, prior to that, they lived on dried meats on their voyages, and they were eating a high carbohydrate diet on top of that. So they're probably increasing their requirements for vitamin C and not getting any fresh meat. So if you're eating fresh meat, it doesn't mean raw meat. It just means meat that's not been dried and preserved. So if you're eating supermarket or grass-fed meat from the online company, you're going to get fresh meat. You're going to have plenty of vitamin C to prevent those particular issues. And so I'm aware of many people that have been doing this diet for much longer than me. I've been doing it for 2 years, but there are people that have been doing it 5, 10, 15, 20 years or more, that are kind of Western people. But I mean, beyond that, there are people that live for thousands of years.
I've also found a couple things that I like, just that I really like, that are really high in vitamin C, like a kiwi fruit, right?
Sure.
Once a week, I'll eat a kiwi fruit, just because I like it. It doesn't seem to affect me, and I think that maybe just supplementing with something like that rather than throwing a bunch of pills down my throat would be a better answer.
I think anytime you can get nutrition from food, you're better off. Do you need to do that? I'm not convinced you do. I don't do that myself.
I'm not even convinced I do either.
Right, but I mean,
but
some people, and it probably doesn't hurt, and I know there's other folks that, will talk about, that's why you need to eat extra amounts of organ meats. I have, in 2007, the Institute of Medicine looked at the RDAs. The Institute of Medicine is a sort of big organization, it's well respected. Not that I'm so much into appealing to authority, but if you look at people that say this, so the Institute of Medicine reviewed the RDAs, and they came to the conclusion, most of the expert reviewers have said, look, the RDAs are based on the lowest level of evidence we possibly have, just expert opinion. And so it basically is saying we really don't know what we're supposed to eat, and we certainly didn't test it on Eskimos. I mean, they didn't develop the RDAs on people eating a carnivore diet. And what I would say is, those numbers are probably different for different people based on their, their background diet. I'm again, I don't have scurvy. I mean, this is funny. And if I do, it works pretty well because you get stronger and leaner and better athletically. If that's scurvy, I guess I'll take it.
Sure.
Yeah. So 2.5 years ago, I was in New Zealand, and I think I was still doing a ketogenic diet, just starting that. And I was reading, I saw some of the stuff you were starting to put up. I think you were just getting on board with it, and a lot of other people were mentioning this. And at the time, it just seemed like, you need plants. You kind of need plants for the basic minerals and whatnot. When I started it, one of the first things I noticed when I started a carnivore diet that I think we can all kind of attest to is immediate increase in strength and muscle mass, which I didn't measure, just looked in the mirror. I got stronger for sure. That much was certain. And we were talking a little bit about Serge Nubret and about some of these guys that ate a ton of meat. One of the things I thought was interesting was, Rick Drayson.
Sure.
And we mention him every now and then. He is one of those bodybuilders from that 70s golden era. And we mentioned Vince Gironda and the steak and eggs diet. These guys were basically eating a carnivore diet throughout their bodybuilding prep. They would occasionally throw in, carbohydrates. But when you look at these guys, Rick Drayson says that they were eating, steak, they were eating red meat, they were eating eggs, they were eating some cottage cheese. And it was all animal-based protein. And they developed what many people think are the most aesthetic physiques from that era. But I think it's very, very effective in terms of muscle growth.
I use the term steakroids a lot in my hashtag steakroids, because I feel like, I've been on testosterone before in my life, and I feel like I get a lot of the same benefits. And speaking of testosterone, you and I both have had incredibly low testosterone levels, right? And I talked to you about it, and you said, well, maybe that's not as important as we think. Have you drawn any further conclusions on testosterone and the levels and things like that?
Yeah. I mean, and I said, this is kind of funny because I was interviewed by a guy named Dennis Mangman about 2 years ago, but I had no idea what my testosterone level. And he goes, what's your testosterone? I said, I don't know, maybe it's low. Maybe my receptor sensitivity is high, and I put that out there. And so when I tested it, and this is right after I was at Super Training, I had a really good workout, trained really hard. Uh-huh. Your testosterone level will vary day to day, even hour by hour. If you check it at 5 o'clock in the morning, it's going to be high. If you check it at 10 o'clock in the morning, it's going to be lower. If you check it at 7 p.m., it's going to be even lower. So it's going to vary tremendously throughout the day. So in 2018, against Stuart Phillips, again, one of the world's leading researchers in muscle protein synthesis, did a study looking at college-age guys, and they looked at their testosterone levels or androgen levels, all the different hormone levels, and what it took for them to get more muscle. And they found there was zero correlation on testosterone level, but what did matter was the androgen receptor density. And so that's something that can go up and down. It can be modulated by strength training. It can be modulated by diet. Red meat can make it go up, or some of the compounds in red meat potentially can make it go up. So there's the interaction between the hormone and the receptor. And that's really probably even too simplified, but you have to have both of those things. So if your receptor levels are going up, then you probably need just less circulating testosterone. Now, I checked my testosterone a week after I released mine, and it was up 100 points, but into a more normal range.
And just to be clear, you've never ventured into the steroid
right?
world.
No,
you never went to the dark side.
No, well, I mean, you can call it dark side. I mean, this is this is funny because I know you made the movie Bigger, Stronger, Faster, and when I was younger and I was competing in powerlifting and lifting at 80 FPA, drug-free USA powerlifting, I was very critical of guys taking steroids. And I've gotten to the point where I just don't really care.
Doesn't matter anymore.
But I mean, I would say, if you're competing in a drug-tested, drug-free organization, you're taking drugs, that's probably not a good thing.
Yeah, it's stupid.
And so my entire career, it was always, I was kind of the vocal guy. I remember when I was in Highland Games and they wanted to allow testosterone replacement in the masters category. I was like, I don't agree with that. I was very vocally opposed to that because I think, it depends where where do you draw the line? You say, well, I'm going to take just enough to be physiological, or am I going to be super physiologically? Now I'm throwing it 20 feet farther. Yeah. So I think so I've been vocally opposed to that my whole life. Not that I don't think people should have the right to do that and they can choose what they want, but I mean, when it comes to sports applications, if you're in a sport where the rules say you're not supposed to do it, then do that. But I mean, for me personally, I just haven't felt the need to do that. I mean, I think that I like the fact that my testosterone works clinically well as a 50-year-old. And that, I think that's the more important thing we have to understand. We have to get away from looking at lab numbers because they're very misleading. They're very much subject to daily, day-to-day changes. And so, it may just be a bad day when you test it, and all of a sudden you're freaking out and, you don't know what to do, and you go through this huge thing. But you've got to look at what is happening on a day-to-day chronic basis, and how do we know what's going on chronically? Well, what's my body composition doing? Am I getting stronger? Am I waking up with a heart on every day? What's my mental state like? What's my libido like? And if those things are going good, that would indicate the chronic nature of what's going on between the receptor and the hormone level, and that's what you need to focus on. And I know it's subjective and it's harder to do, but that's the real deal. That's what we care about. I mean, I could care less if my testosterone were 1,200, and I couldn't get it up. I could care the fuck what my testosterone was.
Exactly.
I mean,
doesn't matter, right?
I'm like, I want to work. I want to function like a normal human being, and so I don't get too hung up on those numbers, and so I don't worry about that. And so, again, you're getting stronger despite, or maybe because of that. Maybe you've got greater androgen receptor density now. You probably do.
Sure. Physiologically, what goes on in the body when we start an all-meat diet?
This is one of the things that a lot of people have confusion on. It's never an all or nothing situation. You're still utilizing glucose as a source of energy. You're still using ketones. You're still using free fatty acids, no matter what diet you're on. Now, it's just the ratios will change a little bit. It's not like if you tested my blood glucose, it would be 0. In fact, mine tends to be a little bit higher because I do intense glycolytic sports where I require higher levels of glucose. So your body will shift around those ratios a little bit. You're going to see general adaptations in the digestive tract, because, you're used to, again, a diet that is high in, fiber and plant material and doesn't require as much, stomach acid, perhaps. Some people might find that when they first start out, their stomach acid is low. A lot of people have, lost the capacity because they've been taking, drugs to suppress acid, like proton pump inhibitors, and aging can kind of do that. You see, there might be some improvements in mitochondrial efficiency. There's some evidence that, again, things like carnitine and some of these substances in meat might cause, improvements in mitochondrial favorability. Carnitine is very important in fat metabolism. There's something called the carnitine shuttle that helps to bring these fatty acids into the mitochondria for oxidation. And so these things, there's going to be many changes, and these things don't happen overnight. These things they're going to occur, over a period of many months for many people, and that's why a lot of people that adaptation time takes weeks to months for many people.
One last question I want to get in here before we start to wrap up is there anybody that carnivore is not a good idea for? Like, this person should not do a carnivore diet.
For example, I told you that we had a woman who said she wasn't thriving on it.
Right,
Are
sure,
there people that this doesn't work for? And,
Well, I mean,
or that
yeah, I
wouldn't be
mean,
good for?
certainly there are people that will try the diet, and it's just not for them. I mean that's clear. I mean, particularly if your only goal is body composition, we talked about whether that's a noble goal or not. Clearly, being morbidly obese is not a good thing. Clearly, getting into a normal health range is probably a good thing. But if your goal, and I know we talked about this, she was an underweight person, and now she's normal weight, and so she's concerned that she's gained weight. And I'm like, well, maybe you were too underweight to start with. But many women that come from this diet, and even some guys that have been strictly, dramatically calorically restricting, and they've really, just really depleted themselves, they may gain weight when they start because you tell them just eat to your satiety. Maybe they need that. Maybe they need to improve their nourishment. But
I think you also said it's not a free pass to all you can eat, right?
Right. It's not an all you can eat buffet. Although for many people it feels that way because it's very hard. It's very satisfying and very satiating. So many people do. They eat. I mean, I know a guy. His name's Chris Donahue. We had him on our program. He was 550 pounds.
I heard him. He was great.
And I mean, he goes to Texas Day, Brazil, several times a week and just gorges on meat, and he's lost 200 and something pounds.
And it works for him.
It works great for him. So for some people, it is kind of an all-you-can-eat pass, but it's not for everybody. But more, for the other people, it may not work for. There are people that are, I mean, if we talk about the world, there are places in the world where it's not practical. There are people where their personal situation is not practical. For some people, it's financially difficult, although you can do this very cheaply if you want to. You can eat ground beef, and you can eat grain-fed ground beef, and I think you can be just fine. You can do it. I mean, many people find it it's actually cheaper than their previous diet. There are people that, some people that have particularly digestive issues, particularly older people, may have lost some of that capacity to produce enough stomach acids. It's very difficult for them to digest meat. Some people don't have very good teeth. They have a problem with chewing. So they eat ground beef
That was
all the time.
Stone Cold Steve Austin's problem. He's like, I just keep damn chewing. I'm chewing all day.
You figure that dude would be tougher. He would have been tougher to chew that stuff.
He's trying it again, he said. So I think
Oh, he did? Okay, I didn't hear that.
One of the things that's great about World Carnivore Month is getting some people to jump in.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think Rogan is.
Joe Rogan.
I haven't heard. I don't know if you've heard from him. I have not heard.
I haven't heard from him either. I don't know if he's like,
He's doing under
radio
the table,
silent on us.
He's waiting till the end of the month to make a
He might be.
proclamation.
He's pretty smart with his stuff.
Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to ask you is about meal frequency. So we have a couple things that are really popular now.
Right.
We have this concept called OMAD, which is 1 meal a day.
Right,
It's like a hashtag.
Right.
These people that eat 1 meal a day and they kind of stick to that. We have people that eat 5 times a day. We have people that eat like twice a day. I think you eat twice a day.
About twice a day, yeah.
Yeah, and I usually eat about twice a day, maybe 3 times a day. Where are you at with your meal frequency? Does it matter? Should we incorporate fasting? Should we incorporate intermittent fasting?
I do think that there are some benefits to not eating every 2 hours. I mean, I think clearly that has been one of the problems that we see with the obesity crisis. We've gotten to a situation where, when I was a kid, there was this concept, don't eat, you're going to spoil your appetite for your dinner. Now it's like, oh, your kid's hungry, give him a juice box, give him a granola bar, give him whatever. You constantly feeding these kids. That probably is not a good strategy nutritionally. And so I think that, eating your fill and eating quality food naturally, will put you in a situation where you don't eat as many meals. And for me, like both you guys, twice a day is pretty normal for me.
Yeah.
I certainly have done the OMAD, the once a meal a day type stuff.
Yesterday I ate once. That was it.
Yeah, I mean, and I'll eat a big, I might put down 3-4 pounds in a sitting, and then I'm good. We're finding out that there are some benefits from fasting clearly, and so I do think that for some people, an actual conscious fast may be of benefit, and these are people that tend to be metabolically pretty difficult. They may be really obese or something like that, or struggling. So those people may find that doing the fast potentially are helpful. I find that guys are like athletic, working out, trying to go 2 or 3 days in a row without eating is probably not a good strategy.
Yeah.
I talked to Jason Fung, who's the author of the some of the fasting
I love Jason
stuff,
Fung,
and he agrees. He said for athletes it's probably not the best idea, but I find that eating once or twice a day works particularly well. And for me, my appetite kind of sets that. And we're sitting there, most of the time you're just not ever hungry. You're not really starving like you were when you're on a carb-based diet.
I'm more mentally hungry a lot.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, hey, I should probably eat something. You just feel like, you need some nutrition.
It's time to eat. Or
You need some nutrition or something like that. But I mean, you never get this like, if I don't eat something in the next 10 minutes, I'm going to pass out. That just doesn't occur anymore. The only thing I'm eating is meat, or essentially, then if I'm hungry, it's really for a reason. My body's saying, look, dude, you need some structure, you need some calories, and so I'll eat, if I can. If I'm in a car driving, I can't stop and eat, but I mean, if I can, I will eat, and I'll eat till I'm full. And I think that is how people are designed. I think that's how any animal in the wild will do it. I mean, when they're not hungry, they don't eat. When they're hungry, they'll eat. And it maybe they have to go kill a zebra if they're a lion. But I mean, if you go to Africa, and I've been out to the Serengeti, and you see these animals, and the guys will point, look at that lion has blood on his face. You can walk right in front of it and won't even move. Doesn't care.
Wow.
Because he's not hungry. And the zebras are walking right next to it, just hanging out, because they know this lion is not going to eat them. But as soon as the lion looks hungry, man, watch out. These guys are like, get out of the way. But I mean, I think that fasting can be beneficial. I think the OMAD stuff can be fine. I just make sure you're not depriving yourself of nutrition, long term. Because again, I find that eating is to nourish us. It's not to starve us. Our goal is to eat the right food and then eat the quantity that our body's asking for, and I think that's a good situation.
I think the last thing I wanted to bring up, unless William has anything else too, but the website that you started, I believe, was your Meat Heals. That's your website. So if you guys go to meatheals.com, my brother Mark, one of the, I respect him a lot, and one of the things that he said to me really hit me. He said, I think Dr. Baker's strongest message is that this diet can help a lot of people that are really metabolically damaged, that have all these weird health problems. What are some of the things that you've seen on Meat Heals? What are some of the testimonials that you've gotten that are just, outstanding and kind of even surprising to you maybe, and like what kind of diseases or things people are dealing with?
Yeah, so I mean, in when I started that, I understand, that we need research and that those things are important, but I also understand the power of story. And as a filmmaker, you'll understand that too. People will relate to people that they share, common things with. And so they'll see, here's a guy who's 100 pounds overweight and he's got diabetes and his back hurts all the time, and he's on 3 or 4 drugs, and that's just like me. And they'll read the story, and that's very powerful. And that's one of the reasons I started this. And I wanted to kind of collate these stories and categorize them so people can easily search. And somebody may be in there saying, man, I got psoriasis, it really sucks. I can go to Meat Heals and I can type in psoriasis, and guess what? There's 15 people that have cured their psoriasis on that. And so, we've seen some really, Chris Donahue's story, Luke going from 500 pounds and losing 200 plus pounds, got rid of his diverticulitis, got rid of his diabetes, and got rid of his depression and a whole bunch of other things. There's Charlene Anderson, one of the people that inspired me to do that.
Yeah, she looks awesome.
20 years of only eating meat, cured Lyme disease, chronic depression, a number of other issues. There are people down there that rheumatoid arthritis, which is crippling, gone away.
Yeah.
There's people with psoriatic arthritis and psoriasis, gone away. There are people that, literally with suicidal depression.
We've seen drug addiction, alcohol addiction
has gone away.
Different things go away.
All kinds of, multiple sclerosis, another one of these autoimmune diseases attacks the nervous system. We've seen people that, were in wheelchairs and now they're able to walk again. So this is stuff that's, just really and true. I can't even keep up with it. I'm just amazed at some of the stuff that I see that just just amazes me. And again,
were you shocked at the amount of outpouring you've got from the Carnivore Diet, from like Joe Rogan's podcast and stuff? Did it surprise you?
Well, I certainly understand Joe's got a huge megaphone. He reaches a lot of audience, so I knew there would be a bump. But it's continued to grow every week. I get more and more people that are interested.
He talks about it all the time, and that's how Mark and I talked him in, and we're like, come on, man, you talk about it all the time. You must want to do it. Like,
no, he sent me a text or a DM and said, the Bell Brothers peer pressure.
Mark was really hammering him.
Yeah. So we'll see what happens if he enjoys it or not. But,
Yeah.
it's obviously that has been probably more than anything in my experience that's sort of brought it more into the limelight, just because he's a big
Yeah, he
voice
moves
out
the
there.
needle a lot on anything.
But I mean, more importantly, the reason I think it continues to move is because people are getting results, and I think you can't ultimately results are what's going to count. And so as long as people get good results on this is going to continue. This message is going to continue to grow, and more people are going to do it. More people are going to have success with it. And like I said, at the end of the day, I'm all about people getting healthier. I don't do this because I don't like animals or something like that.
Sure.
I do that because I like humans.
Yeah.
And I think that is, the message at the end of the day.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. I mean, we really appreciate it. I think you've had a profound effect on both of us, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, thank you for coming on. It's been an honor, a privilege. We got to pick your brain a bit. But yeah, absolutely.
Happy World Carnivore Month, and we're out of here.